Hey guys, it's Two Bricks, and I have a model for you guys today that I completed a little while ago, and I was planning on taking it apart because I need access to a lot of the pieces that this is using. But before I did that, I thought it would be cool to give you guys a look at it and show you what I built, and then yeah, later on this week it's gonna get dismantled. So let's take a look, and we'll start on the back end by the Hogwarts Express. Okay, so I just wanted to do a little bit of a representation of the Hogsmeade station. Even though, you know, in the movies that would be a fair bit further away from the castle grounds, I just felt like it was a cool thing to be able to add that part of the experience in there. Seeing the kids, or imagining them, you know, disembarking onto the platform and starting their journey towards Hogwarts. So the train itself is a fairly simple representation, just using stacked up plates for the most part. I used a configuration of regular plates and jumper plates to create a half-stud gap in between each of the train cabs. I thought that, you know, just looked like the appropriate amount of distance to imagine the couplings and stuff in between each car. And then the actual engine itself just uses one of these fairly new, I don't know what you call these, rounded plates with a clip attachment at the top to create the smokestack, and just relies on roller skate pieces to give it a little extra detail for the train wheels. So there we go. And then this would be the coal car, and then these obviously are the passenger cars back here. I wanted to have just an idea of the train platform, and of course in the movies there are two platforms and there's a footbridge that connects across between them. And once I started trying to add all of that detail in there, it just felt like it was a little too much, it got too busy, and it started to kind of fight with the train or obscure the train and take attention away from it. So I just really wanted to have something where it looks like the train is coming to a stop, and so I just decided to represent a couple of the platform buildings, maybe a waiting room or a ticket office or something like that, and just to give you guys the idea that this is where the train comes in. And then of course I'm using these grill pieces, which are just perfect to represent train tracks at this scale. Oh, and I even have a little stopper at the end of the tracks, just using one of these 1x1 clip pieces. So then once the children disembark and they come down the platform, here waiting for them are the carriages to take them to Hogwarts. And these are, of course, the self-propelled carriages, or so they think. They're actually pulled by the invisible thestrals, which you can only see if you've seen Death. So yeah, I just had a couple of those represented here with a couple more of those roller skate pieces, and those would load up students and take them down either to the boats to be, if they're first years, or take them straight up to the castle if they're second year and above. So on the model, I really wanted to be able to guide the viewer's eye around the castle on a kind of journey that kind of mimics what the students might go through. So anywhere that you see a dark tan smoothed area, that's supposed to represent walkways and areas where people can go. So the carriages, in my mind, would take you down here and either head down in the area that isn't represented here through the forest towards the lakeshore, or they would head up towards the castle in this direction. I just have a very simple technique for representing the trees in the forest, which is just these offset, stacked up 1x1 bricks with occasionally a little brown stud on the bottom to represent a tree trunk. And then I break it up every now and then by having just a few brown bars that just represent maybe dead trees or thinner trees. And then also I'm using brown to represent forest floor. So everywhere that you see brown plates, it's supposed to be kind of more densely covered area. Obviously, at this scale, it's impossible for me to represent every single bit of foliage and every tree. It would just get too crazy, but I just kind of want to give the idea that there's forest there. And then the carriages would wind their way up here and drop off the students at this point to enter the school through the back end, through this more cathedral-like section of the castle, where you see the greenhouses and the training grounds are back here. Right here you can see that I have the offset Quidditch training grounds tower, which kind of vanishes from the movies occasionally. Sometimes it's back there and sometimes it's not. And on the giant studio model that they have at Leavesden Studios on the Harry Potter tour, this whole section of the grounds is actually missing, and the castle terminates right here. So it's tricky. The layout of the castle changes throughout the movies, and that's just one of the things about Harry Potter. But you know, hey, it's a magical school and things shift around, and you know, you can just explain it away that way. So I have an outer wall that continues around the whole back end of the castle to help it be a little bit more defensible. And I represented the Whomping Willow down in here with just a very simple little build with of course, the Ford Anglia trapped in the top of the branches, getting getting bruised on by the tree. And then right down here in the bottom, I had a little assembly of rounded plates just to represent the little gap underneath, which is the tunnel that Snape and Lupin and everybody goes down through to go to the Shrieking Shack. So I just wanted to have a little tiny gap in the base that could hint towards that. And then here are the greenhouses. I really wanted to represent the accurate amount of greenhouses, which I do believe I have done. There's 6 on this side, and then 2 and I guess a half right here. And I think this is the greenhouse where poor Neville forgets his earmuffs. And as we move around more towards this side, you can get a clearer view of these greenhouses, and the build for them is fairly simple as well. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pieces, all of which are trans clear, and those just represent a greenhouse. So yeah, this whole area would be somewhere where students can walk around, and then obviously, contained within this walled off section of the castle. And the funny thing is, actually, we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. That's something that was a problem for the designers, is that they'd made the castle a little too defensible, and so a couple of changes were made for the last movie to make it a bit more vulnerable to attack. And before we move on, I just wanted to draw attention really quick to the design and the build of these roof towers right here, these turrets. I didn't want to use the standard cone configuration because I really wanted to have the 4 towers on either side, or the 4 additional turrets on either side, and the cone piece would just interfere with that. So I just decided to go with this very simple plates on the side of studded bricks design, just to give you guys the sense that there's more detail in the roofs of this section compared with the rest of the castle. All right, so continuing to make our way around the shoreline here towards the kind of iconic part of the castle. In here you can see that I have a little pretzel that is representing a large stained glass window. And then down here I have a technique that I developed for representing arched doorways, which is just to use Technic bricks and then stack plates up in front of them to kind of cut off the hole to create, this semi-round shape to just indicate some kind of an arched doorway in there. Oh, and of course, it's not Hogwarts without some secret areas. So down here, we have the Chamber of Secrets. And down here in the chamber, you can see the basilisk is ready to do some damage. And then we have this kind of watery area up at the front where you have the statue of Salazar Slytherin, which I've just represented very simply down there using a couple of sideways built plates and cheese slopes. And I have that little hollow stud at the bottom that's supposed to represent his mouth, which is where the basilisk emerges from. And then way back in there, it's really hard to see, but I have some Technic bricks that have the hole in it, and those are supposed to just represent tunnels or access into the plumbing. It's just way back in there that the basilisk can use. And then I have these little stacked up faucet pieces to represent all those snake statues that line the sides of the chamber. Okay, and with the chamber section replaced, and we moved around to the front portion of the super iconic view of the castle that everybody knows, with the gigantic tower, the Great Hall, these iconic bridges through here that connect the kind of old section of the castle to the perhaps even older section. I'm not actually sure which part was built first. But yeah, so we'll start down here with the boats. I just represented the boats with some upside down, 1x1 round brown studs, and I feel like that gives it just, the look that you need to get the idea. And of course the boats are way out of scale with the rest of the castle, but hey, Lego pieces only go so small. So then down here they terminate at this little boathouse, and then they would wind their way up in very grand fashion to the Great Hall to be sorted into their houses. And those first years are probably quaking in their boots the whole way up, wondering about what their future holds at the school. So that's really cool. I like that they have all this kind of drama and theatrics that goes into the sorting ceremony and all that. It's really fun. So I think this little tower down here is supposed to represent Filch's office. I think I saw that on one of the plans. I'm not entirely sure. And then the Great Hall itself, I tried to represent it as with as much detail as possible for the scale. So I relied on a couple of these unicorn horns for the little towers at the end. And then I have the grill pieces in gold for representing those tall windows. I just wanted to give a little extra flair, you know. And it's such an iconic structure that I just feel like you have to have that. And then down at the front, I do have a representation of the little clock tower. And again, that same technique for the doorway, the halfway, or the half technical archway. And there's a little sloped piece in here, a little cheese slope that's supposed to represent the staircase that comes down into the courtyard. And so what's interesting is what I mentioned before about how the design of the castle had to change. That is because nothing really connects to the mainland from the castle. Like there's all this kind of rocky stuff where it would be really difficult for enemies to attack. And then, you know, the lake, and everything on the back side of the castle is very well defended. So what they decided to do was to move this bridge in the last movie and connect it directly into this courtyard, and then they kind of redesigned the courtyard with a couple of additional little towers and turrets here to just blend that in. And then this bridge goes all the way out to the mainland. It becomes super long. And that was something that they did so that they could have that big kind of the bottleneck where all of the knights' statues come down and defend the castle, and you know all of Voldemort's forces are trying to get through and attack. But up until the 7th movie, this was the configuration of the bridge where it just connected the courtyard area over to the other side of the school so that students didn't have to go all the way through the back to get there. But yeah, I think, you know, it was a smart decision at the time that they had to create some extra drama for the battle, and I think that most viewers probably wouldn't even notice that this moved because it's fairly close to here anyway, and they would have just assumed it was always like that. But hey, again, magical school, you know, things are going to move. And then if we look up at the kind of iconic large tower section right here, this is where all of the moving staircases and portraits are in the films. And then at the very top, you see Dumbledore's office, and I've just represented that in a really simple fashion by having a quarter round tile in tan plugged in between 2 studs, and then 3 of these grabber arms to represent those really interesting kind of triple stacked tower assemblies that you have up there. And yeah, as you go down, that's kind of in the movies, you can see Dumbledore's office kind of goes down in stages. He's kind of moving through this area right here. Yeah, and then actually, I'll give you guys a little bit of a closer look while I have this out as to how this whole thing was done as well. I'm just using a lot of Lego math and stacking up bracket pieces in all different orientations to give me the studs on the outside for the exact kind of configuration of being able to have all of these rounded sections meet up. And I think that worked out really, really well. So there's that. Obviously, no way to represent all of the windows and stuff at this scale and still maintain that roundness. So you just have to use your imagination on that. And then the reason that there's a little gap here is that it just keys in there perfectly, and just there's a little bit of a plate that pokes out right there. And yeah, I just needed that space. And then for the roof part, I'm trying to represent a cone. At this scale, it's tricky to do. So I just wanted to, here, I'll pull this one off. So I just wanted to have as close to a cone as I could get at this scale. And I'm using a stacked up assembly of these mixels. Sorry, I keep calling them mixels. I'm using a stacked up assembly of these brickheads pieces that have the 4 studs on the outside. And they're so useful because they can just be stacked one on top of the other, and all of the studs will line up, unlike traditional 1x2 brick pieces that have the 2 studs where you have to do a lot of tricky math to get those to line up using plates and stuff. So yeah, that's the way that I represented the conical tower on the top there, and I think it worked out pretty well. And I think as a bonus too, you kind of can imagine some of the window detail or tile detail on the roof as being represented by these little kind of rougher sides of the plates right here. I think it actually does add something. And then that just all plugs in right there. And I can actually rotate this to get the best kind of postcard view of those towers and make sure that they're always poking out. They're kind of like Mickey Mouse's ears. I feel like no matter what angle you look at the castle from, you can always see those poking out. And then continuing still to move around, you can see the backside of the Great Hall right here, and there's this giant stained glass window that's got kind of a wooden frame structure to it. It seems like it is anyway in the films. And that's the window that you have the big epic camera move at the end of Chamber of Secrets that pulls out of this window and then goes all the way back and lets you see the whole castle. So that's a really cool little bit of detail, and I wanted to have that represented. And then I just have a little bit of one of these ratcheted joint pieces poking out that shows sort of there's like a little cap to that window section that is tiled off. So I just wanted to have a little detail to represent that. And then, you can see still the rocky cliff side is kind of continuing, and this section is just hinged and then held in at a certain angle, just to keep, this is all flat underneath. This is just bricks stacked up on their sides, and then this section is just placed on top and then hinged in, and it's very securely stuck in there. It's not going anywhere. And this down here is just a little representation, a little nod to the fact that there is a giant squid that lives in the Black Lake, and I just wanted to have something to show that. Yeah, and then so in here, these areas I think are supposed to be where the common rooms are for all of the different houses on either side, and then down in the bottom here. And then there's a bridge that connects from the hospital wing, which is up here, into the little clock tower right here, which LEGO just recently released a new updated version of their clock tower in their kind of minifigure compatible line of sets, so that was cool to see. I've always liked this view of the castle from the back, and I feel like it never gets enough representation, so that was cool. So I just have a little fountain down here, which is represented by just a couple of clips that are plugged into one another. And then, of course, the wooden walkway that goes across from the backside of the castle and connects it to the area where it goes down into Hagrid's hut. So let's see, I'll give you guys a little bit of a closer look at the bridge here. It's a fairly simplistic technique where on either side I just have an assembly of these stacked up plates, which is clipped in at an angle to inside of the rocks, and then they both kind of lean on one another, and then the bridge part is connected on the top, and it just kind of locks it all together. And then if you take a look over here, so the kids would come across the bridge and then come out of this little structure here, and then this is the part where Draco Malfoy and his goons were looking down over Hagrid's hut, waiting for Buckbeak's execution, and Hermione gets to very satisfyingly punch Draco Malfoy right in the face. I wanted to represent that little area and make it so that it's a believable sight line from there to Hagrid's hut, which is down here in the corner. And if we take a look at Hagrid's hut as well, it's very, very simply represented with just a couple of pieces stacked up for the main structure, a few plates, and then one of these interesting kind of half diamond pieces on the top. And then the second building is just a stud with one of these silver kind of ice cream swirl pieces to represent a rounded roof. And then it's just set in at an angle, and then I have a little single 1x1 orange piece to represent Hagrid's pumpkin patch. So it's inset into the forest here, and I wanted to represent some of the wilder areas of the forest down in this part. So I have a representation of Aragog and his children. These are supposed to be the large-scale spiders in here. And then down here I have a single trophy fig in gray, those microfigs, and that's supposed to represent Grawp, which is Hagrid's giant half-brother. So, again, comically out of scale, but I just wanted to have a little fun representation of that in there. And we can take a look down this little fun ravine that goes down the middle of the castle right here, and I believe that is the scene, the area where in the Goblet of Fire, Harry leads the dragon through kind of, ducking under and going through all the bridges to try to avoid the dragon. So that was a really fun part. And then just have the water come in and kind of terminate right here, because I do believe that you are supposed to be able to access all of this area, because there's a shot in The Prisoner of Azkaban where we see Harry coming across this bridge and heading over towards the Owlery. So I just wanted to make sure that that was possible. Even though the terrain is kind of rough, you can actually make your way over there. And then if we take a look down on this side, you can see that the Quidditch field is, of course, a must for any Hogwarts display that considers itself to be complete. And I just represented the standees with a very simple stacked up plate configuration, and then a brown stud here that just represents the kind of wooden structure where the people actually sit and watch the game. And I think that, oh, I knocked one of the goalposts loose, excuse me. But while I'm fixing that, I'll give you guys a look at how those are done. So these are the goal hoops, of which there are 3. And I'm just using a very simple Lord of the Rings, one ring piece. And that's plugged into one of these gray clips, and then a gold hollow stud holds the whole thing up. And there are, of course, 3 on either side. And, the game of Quidditch takes place in here, and above. I'm not sure why anybody in the stands would enjoy watching people fly around a mile up looking for the snitch, but hey, wizards are going to do what wizards do, I guess. And then off to the side here, you can see there's the little tent, which is where the people go to kind of relax before the game. And I believe in the Goblet of Fire they convert this arena into the dragon fighting arena. I'm not 100% sure about that, but they have that little white tent off to the side. So just wanted to represent that as well. And so with that, we've come back to the beginning, and we've gotten a look at the whole overview of the castle. And I'll just give you guys a couple of extra shots of some of the interesting parts within that I didn't really get to, and then we'll wrap it up. All right, if we take a look at it from above, you can see all of the different little courtyards and little interesting areas on the inside between the structures that I didn't really get a chance to showcase before. And I really like how I achieved this bridge right here. It's a very, very simple technique where I've turned a 1x6 arch piece upside down and then put a 1x8 plate on the top of it, or I'm sorry, a flat tile. And then that just plugs into 2 gaps on the either side of these walls and just pins it into place. Creates that bridge. And then another thing I didn't really get to show you guys before was the astronomy tower. And I'm going to show it to you from the other side, actually. This is, of course, where Dumbledore has his fateful encounter with Professor Snape. And it's famously the highest point of the castle, where people are actually allowed to go. And when you look at it from back here, technically the main tower is taller, but there's no place for people to actually be able to stand outside of that. So the astronomy tower right here is the tallest point on the castle where people can actually go. There's like a balcony section out here. And then I wanted to make it so that it was believable that Dumbledore could fall from this tower and wind up in this courtyard down here where everybody has that really touching scene where they all light their wands and they dispel the dark mark. So that was something that was important to me as well. Even though, again, the size and shape and location of the astronomy tower does change throughout the movies, I think this is the most iconic version of it that I could find. And then just off to the right of that is the little tower where Sirius Black was being held captive until they flew up there with Buckbeak and bombarded the door and got him out of there. So there's that. And I'll just give you guys some kind of lower angles of some of these areas that we didn't really get to see up too close before. Oh yeah, this was something that I found interesting. This courtyard is pretty dilapidated when you look at it in the movies, as opposed to the one over here, which is in really good shape. Or at least up until the 7th movie, where everything gets destroyed. But yeah, this one has a lot more kind of open, exposed, cracked areas, and I just wanted to represent that in the architecture a little bit. So that's interesting. Oh, and then, of course, I forgot to mention the owlery. This is where everyone comes to send their mail. And that's just represented as these 2 tall stacked towers. And I think up here is where Harry embarrassed himself asking Cho to the Yule Ball. Okay, guys, thanks for going on that little journey with me. Sorry if it took a little longer than I had hoped. But yeah, this was a really, really fun build to do. And it was something that I had seen a couple of other builders attempt, but I'd seen a lot of things like modifications of pieces, painting of bricks to achieve certain colors, and I just wanted to see if I could build this whole castle and the grounds in my own style and have something that would look really cool on my desk. And yeah, it ended up being this really huge project, and it was a lot of fun. And now it's time for it to say goodbye. So thank you guys for taking a look at it with me, and I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please go ahead and thumbs up, share, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff.